Wow. Hey, much love and respect. Thanks for tuning in once again. This video is a little related to the previous video when we're talking about the Sons of Liberty, Boston Tea Party, who were the people in the Revolutionary War, who was it organized by really, behind the scenes, secret societies, Masonic orders, so-called brotherhoods. And today we're going to talk about who they got influenced by. Who were they really getting all these ideas from? Perhaps who they might have been related to, a lot of them being half Indians, half Iroquois descendants, and bringing what they learned from the American Indians into their so-called American Revolution. Shout out to Topcast, great presentation he had on this, Amani Bay. Just want you guys to know that, the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, and the American Union were established and influenced by American Indians, mainly the Iroquois. So we're just going to be reading a couple things here. Hope you guys enjoy. I'm going to be reading from this book, Indian Roots of American Democracy, edited and with introduction by Jose Barreto. We're in part 2 of this book. We're going to be reading from this chapter, Iroquoian Political Concept and the Genesis of American Government, Donald A. Grind, Jr. There is ample scholarly opinion and factual data to conclude that the Founding Fathers respected and used American Indian ideas as the American government evolved. Recently, a few anthropologists and ethnohistorians unfamiliar with the interpretive and documentary evidence have concluded that there is no evidence to support the notion that the Iroquois and other Native American confederacies had an influence on the evolution of American government. Such sweeping generalizations are facile and dated in light of the interpretive and documentary evidence that has emerged in the last 2 generations. Much of the scholarship that ignores the importance of Native American ideas in American history also marginalizes the role of American Indians in our history. The process of marginalization has gone so far that it is difficult for some scholars to believe that Iroquois Sakims were present at the debates surrounding the Declaration of Independence. As the debates on independence took place, Benjamin Franklin proposed his revised Albany Plan of Union as the new form of government. The Iroquois' visit to Congress in 1776 was no casual affair, okay? In August of 1775, they had been invited to view the workings of the Grand Council Fire in Philadelphia. In reality, scholars have painted the Iroquois out of the historical picture that portrays the road to American independence and self-government. 300 years ago, the ideas and political systems of the Iroquois and other confederations were so appealing that William Penn would describe Indian government in complementary terms. Penn described the native confederacies of Eastern America as political societies with Sakimship inherited through the female side. Penn was also familiar with the condolence ceremony of the Iroquois, which was crucial for an understanding of their confederacy. He stated that when someone kills a woman, they pay double the wampum, since she breeds children which men cannot. After exposure to American Indian forms of government and unity, William Penn proposed a plan for a union of the colonies in America. Although it was just an outline, Penn seemed inspired by his observations of American Indian polities. Alright, the influence started way back with Penn. A couple of generations later, another Pennsylvanian, Benjamin Franklin, would formulate another plan of colonial union that would more closely reflect Iroquois influences. Franklin, familiar with the ways of the Iroquois, published a series of Indian treaties. He attended a condolence ceremony in 1753, less than a year before his authorship of the Albany Plan of Union. Franklin recognized the enormous appeal of American Indian ways in 1753 as well. He wrote in 1753 that American Indian children, reared in white society, returned to their people when they took but one ramble with them. While discussing the attractions of American Indian society, Franklin wrote of the Great Council of Onondaga and how the Six Nations educated their men in what was the best manner. Just 9 months before the Albany Congress of 1754, Franklin attended a treaty council at Carlisle, Pennsylvania in October 1753. During this treaty with the Iroquois and the Ohio Indians, Franklin saw the rich imagery and ideas of the Iroquois at close hand. On October 1st, 1753, he watched the Oneida chief Scarojati and a Mohawk Kayangilegua condole the Ohio Indians for their losses against the French. Franklin listened while Scarojati spoke of the origins of the Iroquois Great Law to the Ohio Indians. We must let you know that there was friendship established by our and your grandfathers, and a mutual council fire was kindled. In this friendship, all those then under the ground, who had not obtained eyes or faces, that is, those unborn, were included, and it was then mutually promised to tell the same to their children and children's children. The following day, Franklin and the other treaty commissioners echoed earlier statements of the Iroquois when they said, "We would therefore hereby place before you the necessity of preserving your faith entire to one another, as well as to this government. Do not separate, do not part on any score. Let no differences nor jealousies subsist a moment between nation and nation, but join together as one man." So Franklin's literally just repeating the values and the ways of the Iroquois. In replying to these remarks, Scarojati took for granted the knowledge that the treaty commissioners had of the structure of the Iroquois Confederacy, when he requested that you will please to lay all our present transactions before the council at Onondaga, that they may know we do nothing in the dark. Thus, on the eve of the Albany Congress, Franklin had a great deal of exposure to the imagery and political ideas of the Iroquois, both from first-hand experience and from his reading of Cadwallader Colden's History of the Five Nations. At the Albany Congress the next year, the Mohawk Sakim Hendrick challenged the Americans to use Iroquois-style unity and to bring as many into this covenant chain as you possibly can. With this ammunition and his previous knowledge of the imagery and concepts of the Iroquois Great Law, Franklin met with both colonial and Iroquois delegates to create a plan of unity that was in part derived from some of the tenets of the Great Law of the Iroquois. In fact, Franklin admitted that the debates over the Albany Plan went on daily with the Indian business. During the discussions, Hendrick openly criticized the colonists and hinted that the Iroquois would not ally with the English colonies unless a suitable form of unity was established among them. Hendrick asserted on July 9, 1754 that we, which this fire, tree of friendship may grow up to a great height, and then we shall be a powerful people. James Delancey, acting governor of New York, replied to Hendrick's speech in this manner: "I hope that by this present union we shall grow up to a great height, and then we shall be as powerful and famous as you were of old." The next day, Franklin formally proposed his plan of union before the Congress. It had a grand council, a speaker, and called for a general government, under which each colony may retain its present constitution. So Franklin was literally copying the Iroquois. That's what they're letting you know here. In 1943, after editing Franklin's Indian treaties, Julian P. Boyd stated that Benjamin Franklin in 1754 proposed a plan for union of the colonies, and he found his materials in the Great Confederacy of the Iroquois. Boyd also believed that the ability of the Iroquois to unite peoples over a large geographic expanse made their form of government worthy of copying. As Americans grew more restive under the autocracy of British rule, they turned to Native American ideas for alternatives. The Iroquois also provided the rebellious colonists with an alternative identity. During the Stamp Act crisis, the New York City Sons of Liberty, alright, we already got that drop on the previous video, who's the Sons of Liberty, sent wampum belts to the Iroquois asking them to intercept British troops moving down the Hudson to occupy New York City. Alright, so you see they were allying with the Iroquois. After this appeal, the Sons of Liberty put up a pine post called the Tree of Liberty, where they conducted their daily exercises. Alright, and that's that famous elm tree where they met, the Sons of Liberty and the Loyal Nine. In 1772, the Constitutional Sons of St. Tammany, I remember that this was the same people, the Sons of Liberty. Eventually, a lot of them became Sons of St. Tammany or switched the name, which grew out of the Sons of Liberty, all right, as it says here, claimed that they wished to preserve their constitutional American liberties. Tammany was a respected Delaware chief who American patriots sainted, all right? They had American Indian saints, all right? A lot of these Masonic orders, they made a lot of the chiefs saints, just like the Catholic or Christian saints. The New York City Sons of Tammany trace their roots to the Sons of Liberty. Indeed, Benjamin Franklin was a member of the Tammany Society. Do you hear that? Benjamin Franklin was of this order, Masonic order, secret society, St. Tammany. And after his death, the society continued to tell Indian anecdotes of Franklin at its meetings, all right? Benjamin Franklin was down with these same people who dressed up like Iroquois and thumbed the T, yes. As the American Revolution drew nearer, the American colonists turned to American Indian ideas and images to assert their desire for freedom and autonomy. In 1773, the Sons of Liberty in Boston dressed as Mohawks to dump tea in Boston Harbor. Now remember that, yes, a lot of them dressed up and put coal in their face and everything to have a dark complexion, to look like Indians. But we also read that there was a number of Mohawks actually with them that went and helped them dump the tea. There was actually a lot of people that day. In August of 1775, members of the Continental Congress met with the Iroquois, all right, the Continental Congress. We're going to get into who they were. These were the presidents before Washington. I know you guys know about this stuff, but we're going to try to get more specific and try to understand why we don't know about these people, why they tell us Washington is the first president. Again, you guys can see that in August of 1775, the members of the Continental Congress met with the Iroquois and recalled Iroquois admonitions of unity and said, "We have taught our children to follow it." The Americans also invited the Iroquois to visit and observe our Great Council fire at Philadelphia. In January of 76, George Washington introduced John Adams as a member of the Grand Council fire at Philadelphia. In May and June of 1776, chiefs from 4 tribes of the Six Nations, all right, the Iroquois Confederacy, were at Independence Hall. In fact, the meeting with the Iroquois Sakines was so important that the Continental Congress ordered George Washington to leave his post in New York City and come to Philadelphia to review Pennsylvania troops in late May of 1776. That's how important it was to meet with the Iroquois. And you know how they say, oh, the Iroquois were there, the Iroquois were there. But shout out to Top Cat, great presentation again. Then you know that it was mainly Indians doing this as the Continental Army, fighting in the war and, influencing, helping them, teaching them how to do a government. On June 11, 1776, during the debates on independence, and Onondaga chief gave President John Hancock the name Caranduan, or the Great Tree. All right, remember John Hancock was a Sons of Liberty member, so they're naming him a Caranduan, right? They're giving him an Indian name. This is what I want you to see, the relationship they had with the Iroquois, the Great Tree. On the same day, plans for a confederation based on Franklin's 1754 Albany Plan of Union were reported to a committee of the Continental Congress that later drafted the Articles of Confederation. Okay, these are the presidents before Washington. So based on Franklin's Albany Plan of Union, which was based on the Iroquois government, on that same day, reported to the Continental Congress, who later drafted the Articles of Confederation. This is the beginning of the U.S. democratic government. They got this from American Indians. After the Iroquois Sachems left in late June, and as Franklin's revised Albany Plan was in committee, James Wilson, delegate from Pennsylvania and future author of the first draft of the United States Constitution, argued forcefully for a confederation similar to the Iroquois League. It has to be similar like them, guys. On July 26, 1776, Wilson asserted that Indians know the striking benefits of confederation, and we have an example of it in the Union of the Six Nations. Wilson recalled his diplomatic mission to the Iroquois in 1775, when he stated that the idea of the Union of the colonies struck the Iroquois forcibly last year. In essence, Wilson, a friend of Franklin, believed that a strong confederation like the Iroquois Confederacy was crucial not only to the development of the new nation, but also to the maintenance of friendly relations with the Iroquois. In 1777, the Continental Congress published propaganda using an Iroquois prophecy that emphasized the synthesis of European and Iroquois ways in North America. The pamphlet Apocalypse de Chiocoy Chiefs de Iroquois, from 1777, asked the French to side with the Americans and implied that America was developing a government that reflected some Iroquois ways. Using a diplomatic idiom, a news carrier bird, Teshkleleli, the pamphlet proclaimed that an Iroquois prophecy was coming to pass, and that if the French allied with the Americans, it would be a great victory for humanity. As the revolution unfolded, the Iroquois' example of strength through unity gained a powerful hold on the American people. At Valley Forge, the Continental Army staged an elaborate St. Tammany Society ceremony on April 30 and May 1st of 1778. All right, who? The Continental Army. And again, shout out to Top Cat. Who was that Continental Army? A lot of Indians. They did what? They staged an elaborate St. Tammany Society ceremony. Washington's men marched past maypoles and clasped bundles of 13 arrows to demonstrate American unity in the style of the Iroquois. On the evening of May 1st, 1778, the officers had a song and dance in honor of King Tammany. After the American Revolution, 3 Virginia politicians and future presidents, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and James Monroe, all right, decided to visit the Iroquois. The so-called black founding fathers visited the Iroquois. The first to go was James Madison in 1784, observing that Virginia and other states were unwilling to give powers to a central government. Madison decided to accompany the Marquis de Lafayette and his entourage on a trip to Iroquois country. The trip was to Fort Stanwix near Rome, New York. What Madison witnessed was startling. Ostensibly, Western expansion was Madison's main concern for the trip. Also, he must have been thinking about a government that would unite diverse peoples across a great geographic area when he thought of westward expansion. Perhaps this is the reason he consulted with his old friend Grasshopper and Oneida Sakim when he got to Iroquois country. These remarkable experiences had an impact on Madison as he was seeking to forge a new government in the next few years. While at Fort Stanwix, Madison renewed his friendship with the Oneida Sakim, Grasshopper, who had visited Philadelphia several years earlier. Madison was exposed firsthand to the ideas and political concepts of the Iroquois. Although Thomas Jefferson had wanted to visit the Iroquois with James Monroe in 1784, his appointment as French ambassador forced him to abandon his plans to go to Iroquois country. However, James Monroe did go without Jefferson. Jefferson was very emphatic about his lifelong interest in American Indians. In a letter to John Adams, Jefferson pointed out that as a child and as a student, he was in continual contact with Native Americans. He explained this contact in these terms. Concerning Indians, in the early part of my life, I was very familiar and acquired impressions of attachment and commiseration for them which have never been obliterated. Before the Revolution, they were in the habit of coming often in great numbers to the seat of government, where I was very much with them. Emphasis added, I knew much the great Ontaset, the warrior and orator of the Cherokees. He was always the guest of my father on his journeys to and from Williamsburg. John Adams responded to Jefferson's experiences with American Indians in this manner. I have also felt an interest in the Indians and a commiseration for them with my childhood. Aaron Pomham and Moses Pomham of the Hunkapunk and Neponset tribes were frequent visitors of my father's house, and I, in my boyish rambles, used to call at their wigwam. Real quick, In the journal article, The Iroquois League, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution by Samuel B. Payne Jr. This is from the William and Mary Quarterly, Volume 53, Number 3, Indians and Others in Early America, pages 605 to 620. It says here, the standard works of the United States Constitution and the Articles of Confederation do not credit the American Indians with having contributed to their origins. Indians are absent as intellectual influences, right? So they're saying how they don't, give them the right credit. From such sources as Gordon S. Wood's The Creation of the American Republic and the Radicalism of the American Revolution, Bernard Bailyn's The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution, Samuel H. Beer's To Make a Nation, and Jack N. Revolke's The Beginning of National Politics, to cite a few distinguished and representative examples. All right, so these are all like popular mainstream books on the origin of the Constitution and American democracy and all that, and they leave out, they never credited the Iroquois, is what they're pointing out here. Instead, these works describe the political ideas of 18th century British American leaders and thinkers as creative adaptations of the European intellectual heritage to American conditions. The intellectual roots of the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation lay, the mainstream authors assert, in Europe. All right, so they're saying all that came from Europeans. In Great Britain, above all, in continental Europe to a considerable extent, and in ancient Rome and Greece to a much lesser extent. So they're saying that goes back to Rome, huh? The Magna Carta, huh? We're going to get into that, all right, as we keep learning, right, on this journey. What's the Magna Carta? Is it similar to the Great Law of Peace? Who were the ancient Romans? In contradiction to the mainstream is a revisionist school that gives much of the credit to the American Indians. Right? On the other hand, there's much documentary evidence, as we just read. The revisionists believe that the Iroquois Indians, the forgotten founders, as Bruce E. Johansen terms them, significantly influenced the joining together of the 13 colonies in 1776, the writing of the Articles of Confederation, and the construction of a federal system of government in 1787 and 1788. Although the Iroquois influence thesis lacks the persuasive power of the mainstream European influence thesis, it has been widely propagated and for that reason alone deserves serious critical examination. Lewis Henry Morgan, who made the first comprehensive study of the Iroquois politics and society, may also have been the first proponent of the Iroquois influence thesis. In 1881 he wrote, "It is worthy of remembrance that the Iroquois commended to our forefathers a union of the colonies similar to their own as early as 1755. Subsequent scholars developed and promoted this thesis, among them J.N.B. Hewitt, Felix X. Cohen, Donald A. Grind Jr., Johansen, Jack Weatherford, Orrin Lyons, John C. Mohawk, and Robert W. Venables. Charles Stewart Goodwin describes the Iroquois Confederacy as one of the three sources of inspiration for his proposed remodeling of the American system of government. The Iroquois influence thesis has been espoused by an American fraternal organization, the Imperial Order of the Red Men." All right, you understand why we learned about them first? You understand where we're going with this? All right, these are secret societies, these are Masonic orders, and they know what's up. They know America's the true old world, right? We read their books letting us know this is the true old world, the true Egypt. They know. They copied the ancient ones. Who? The Imperial Order of Red Men, and is preserved to this day as an oral tradition among the Iroquois themselves. In the last few years, the Iroquois influence thesis has shown signs of being accepted as a new orthodoxy in some quarters. Alvin M. Josephy Jr.'s 500 Nations, a well-received book written for a general audience, gives the Iroquois credit for having influenced the development of the Constitution. A recent curriculum guide for 11th grade history classes in New York State public schools prescribes the study of the Iroquois political system as one of the three foundations of the United States Constitution. In October 1988, the United States Congress passed a concurrent resolution asserting that the confederation of the original 13 colonies into one republic was influenced by the political system developed by the Iroquois Confederacy. As for many of the democratic principles which were incorporated into the Constitution itself, On the other hand, the Iroquois' influence thesis is not yet universally accepted, even in the forms otherwise sympathetic to revisionist theses about American history. It's going to show you Indians ain't savage. It's going to show you who's the real founding fathers. It's all about American Indians really fighting for their revolution. It does not appear, for example, in the National Standard for United States History, Exploring the American Experience, issued by the National Center for History in the schools, right? They don't teach you this in schools. They don't emphasize it. The leading advocates of the thesis see Indian influence in many aspects of the United States system of government: life, liberty, and happiness, Declaration of Independence, government by reason and consent rather than coercion, Albany Plan and Articles of Confederation, right? That was based on the Iroquois, right? The Albany Plan is what Benjamin Franklin, wrote and gave a speech on and, proposed, and that was based on the Iroquois. And that's what helped draft the Articles of Confederation. Religious tolerance and ultimately religious acceptance instead of a state church, checks and balances, federalism, United States Constitution, and relative equality of property, equal rights before the law, and the thorny problem of creating a government that can rule equitably across a broad geographic expanse. Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution. Native America had a substantial role in shaping all these ideas. Okay? Other authors credit the Iroquois with having inspired female suffrage, the impeachment of government officials, and Congress employment of conference committees. The heart of the argument, where the documented record has the greatest claims to strength, concerns Indian influence on the joining together, first of the colonies under the Articles of Confederation, then of the states under the federal Constitution. Accordingly, the present essay focuses on these topics, that is to say, on the formation of the American Union. It concentrates on writings of Donald Grind and Bruce Johansen, right? The creation of the American Union by who? By the American Indians, or the values or ideas of American Indians. So again, it concentrates on the writings of Donald Grind and Bruce Johansen, who have made the most detailed and authoritative statements of the Iroquois influence thesis. It summarizes their argument and examines the evidence and concludes that their position is unfounded. All right, make sure to read the books from Donald Grind and Bruce Johansen for all the proof. They got it from the Iroquois, all right, the Constitution, there's no doubt. Grind and Johansen maintain that the Iroquois influenced the formation of the American Union in two ways. The first was through the advice and ideas that Iroquois spokesmen conveyed directly to the authors of the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. The second was through the force of example exerted by Iroquois political practices that American leaders observed and used as models in devising a new system of government. In evaluating the latter argument, it is important to distinguish among three images of the Iroquois: the Iroquois as they actually were in the 17th and 18th century, the Iroquois as the authors of the Articles of Confederation and the framers of the Constitution understood them to be in the late 18th century. All right, the true authors of the Articles of Confederation. Proponents of the thesis describe the Iroquois as constituting in the 17th and 18th centuries a powerful confederacy, the Iroquois League, comprising 5, later 6 nations. In the words of Grind and Johansen, each of the 5 nations maintained its own council, whose Sakims were nominated by the clan mothers of families holding hereditary rights to office titles. The clan mothers could remove a Sakim from office. There was also a Grand Council, made up of the 50 Sakims who led the 5 nations and other leaders chosen by the council itself, that met once a year to keep the peace among the Iroquois and to negotiate agreements with other Indians and with European colonists. However, the Grand Council could not interfere in the internal affairs of the tribe. The entire political structure was regulated and maintained by a type of constitution, the great law of peace, passed down over the centuries, and all oral traditions supplemented by the use of wampum belts as mnemonic devices. The Iroquois Influence School sees in this combination a central government with limited powers and substantially autonomous local governments, a marked resemblance to the American federal system. In this they followed the lead of Morgan, on whose League of the Haudenosaunee, or Iroquois, they rely heavily. Morgan refers to the nations sustaining nearly the same relation to the League that the American states bear to the Union. If that analogy is accepted, then it is plausible to assert, as Grind and Johansen do, that the formation of the American Union in close geographic proximity to the Iroquois League, and while the League was flourishing, suggests that the Union was inspired by or modeled on the League. Grind and Johansen also perceived the influence of the Iroquois League's example on the United States Constitution, and remarks John Adams made in a defense of the Constitution of Government of the United States of America. They quote his statement that, in the form of government of the ancient Germans and modern Indians, the existence of the three divisions of power is marked with a precision that excludes all controversy. From this, they infer that the Iroquois League helped form Adams' view on the separation of powers, and through him, the views of the framers, since the League of the Iroquois was the best example of governmental separation of powers available to Americans for direct observation. Grind and Johansen also point to other references to Indian politics and customs scattered through Adams' book, and assert that the book was an important influence on the deliberations of the Constitutional Convention. Indian Roots of American Democracy, edited and with introduction by Jose Barreto. Both Jefferson and Adams felt their experiences with American Indians were important. Adams, like Jefferson, was skeptical of European ideas. Indeed, Adams felt wary of philosophers, theologians, politicians, and historians. They are an immense mass of absurdities and lies. In this intellectual environment, the innovative minds of the period easily turned to American Indian ideas. Franklin, Madison, Jefferson, and Adams were pragmatic enough to know that many of the concepts of American Indian liberty and freedom could not be transferred rapidly to Euro-American forms of government. A few months before the Constitutional Convention, Jefferson wrote Madison about the virtues of American Indian government. Societies as among our Indians may be best, but I believe them inconsistent with any great degree of population. Although most scholars are aware of the knowledge that Jefferson, Madison, and Franklin had of the Iroquois, few have noticed that Adams discussed American Indian governments in his works of American and world governments. Sensing the need for an analysis of American and world governments, Adams wrote his defense of the constitutions of the United States in 1786 and published it in 1787. On the eve of the Constitutional Convention, the defense had been called the finest fruit of the American Enlightenment. Adams saw two conflicting views on the nature of government in America. On the eve of the Constitutional Convention, he recognized in Franklin's admonitions of unicameral legislature, as in the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1776, a sense of serenity, of character, since the Pennsylvania Constitution placed a great deal of faith in one house as the best way to express the will of the people. However, Adams believed in a kind of intellectual perpetual motion, where balancing the interests of the aristocracy and the common people through a divided or complex government seemed the best course to avoid anarchy and tyranny. Adams pointed out that the French philosophies were on Franklin's side. Documentary evidence indicates that Franklin talked a great deal about the Iroquois and their customs in the French saloons during the American Revolution. French physician and philosophy Pierre Jean Georges Cabanis observed that while discussing concepts of liberty and government, Franklin loved to cite and practice faithfully the proverbs of his friends, the American Indians. Keep the chain of friendship bright and shining. So you hear what they're saying? Benjamin Franklin was kind of always quoting American Indians when he's giving his little philosophies and speeches, right, about liberty and all that. Rather than believing, as Franklin did, in the voice of the people, Adams held a more pessimistic view of human nature. In all orders of society in his defense, he felt that a separation of powers in government was crucial to maintain a republic. With these ideas in mind, one can see how American Indian governments, and more specifically, the Iroquois League, were factored into the intellectual discourses on government at the time of the Constitutional Convention, okay? Drawing on his knowledge and experience with American Indians, Adams' defense urged the Founding Fathers at the Constitutional Convention to investigate the government of modern Indians, because the separation of powers in their three branches of government is marked with a precision that excludes all controversy. In creating a new constitution, Adams believed that the study of the legislation of the Indians would be well worth the pains. In making these statements, Adams recognized that some of the great philosophers of the age, such as Benjamin Franklin and Turgot, were arguing in part for the establishment of governments like modern Indians. Adams implied that the Iroquois style of government had 50 families governed by all authority in one center. He believed that people like Franklin advocating such unicameral governments ran the risk of setting up governments that would develop the individual independence of the Mohawks. Adams knew the basic political structure of Native American confederacies, since he described them in this manner. Every nation in North America has a king, a senate, and a people, all right? A senate, all right? A senator, senate, and a people. The royal office is elective, but it is for life. His sachems are his ordinary council, where all national affairs are deliberated and resolved in the first instance. But in the greatest of all, which is declaring war, the king and sachems call a national assembly round a great council fire, communicate to the people their resolution, and sacrifice an animal. Those of the people who approve the war partake of the sacrifice, throw the hatchet into the tree, after the example of the king, and join in the subsequent war songs and dances. Those who disapprove take no part of the sacrifice, but retire. When the men at the Constitutional Convention embraced the two-house concepts of John Adams, they were not enacting a copy of the English Houses of Lords and Commons. Rather, they were trying to balance the parts of government one from another. Obviously, Adams saw the wisdom of balance and separation of powers in American Indian governments and urged that their examples be examined and copied in part. Adams' admonitions to study Indian governments were not the only ones. During the Constitutional Convention, an editorial address to the federal Constitution used the bundle of arrows imagery, section 57 of the Iroquois Constitution, and urged the drafters of the Constitution to incorporate the idea of unite or die into their deliberations. You see that? They got that from the Iroquois. During the ratification period of the United States Constitution, Matthew Carey, in consultation with Benjamin Franklin, asserted in a major Philadelphia magazine that Franklin's Albany Plan of Union 1754 had a strong resemblance to the present system. Carey believed that an examination of the similarities of the Constitution and the Albany Plan will convince the wavering. The new Constitution is not a fabrication of the moment. And reflecting on the process of drafting the Constitution, Charles Pinckney, a delegate from South Carolina, observed that from the European world no precedents are to be drawn for a people who think they are capable of governing themselves. During the debates in South Carolina, after the ratification of the Constitution, the Tammany Society, all right, remember who the Tammany Society is, a previous video, toasted the Constitution as our tree of peace that will shelter us with its branches of union. The Tammany Society, which had added or Columbian Order to its name in the 1780s, believed that the United States was a synthesis of European and American Indian ideas, all right? Remember, this is a secret society. This notion persisted in the history of the Tammany Society well into the 20th century. The interpretive and documentary data demonstrate that Native American Iroquois ideas were used in American political discourse during the latter part of the 18th century. Moreover, American Indian notions of confederation and federalism, separation of powers, and uniting vast geographic expanses under a non-colonial government were important alternative concepts that the Founding Fathers used when they found portions of the British system lacking or repugnant. Example, the monarchy, hereditary nobility, the lack of enumeration of human rights. Letting you know they were grabbing American Indian ideas and values, not European. In essence, America is not a complete transplantation of European society. Okay, it's not. And the revolutionary generation rejoiced that in fact. Although there are a few scholars of the American Indian that oppose the notion that the ideas of the Iroquois and or other Native American peoples were a factor in the evolution of American government, there is a body of interpretive and documentary evidence that provides a strong basis for a debate over the degree of American Indian, and more specifically the Iroquois, influence on the evolution of American government. Many colonists and some contemporary scholars may have wanted to assume that Euro-Americans evolved a discrete transplanted European culture without American Indian influences, but the behavioral controls to facilitate such a policy were not present 200 years ago, and it is doubtful that they effectively exist today. Why is it so difficult to understand that when Europeans left Europe, they encountered non-Caucasians and thus were forced to function in a multicultural, multiracial environment? All right, multiracial. We know that through slavery, segregation, theories of environmental decay, and scientific racism, Europeans and Euro-Americans sought valiantly to create genetic and cultural extensions of Europe. However, North America was not and never would be Europe. Educational, religious, and social institutions were not present to replicate the European order. Moreover, the Euro-Americans needed more institutional control to perpetuate European ways than did the Europeans, because the Euro-American people had viable alternatives to European ways at their doorstep. Colonial governments in America recognized the difficulties in maintaining European ways. In 1747, George Clinton, royal governor of New York, believed that most American democratic leaders were ignorant, illiterate people of republican principle who have no knowledge of the English Constitution or love of their country.